Hey guys, TheJordude from Complexity Gaming here, and today I wanted to give you guys a little guide on Ramp Druid. So Ramp Druid is a deck that has always performed really well, either in tournaments or in ladder, and it's just a really good, consistent, solid deck. Even though the meta shifts consistently, Druid has always seemed to be a very strong deck to play. So Druid as a class is very versatile. You can play Druid in many ways. There's Token Druid, which is more of an aggressive build. Mech Druid is also more of a aggressive deck. Then you have the more defensive builds such as Taunt Druid, which has a bunch of big taunts. And then there's Mill Druid, which focuses on milling your opponent and keeping healthy. And today we're going to focus on Ramp Druid. Ramp Druid is probably the most popular archetype of Druid out there, and that's because it kind of plays control, as you get board control, you keep board control, and I normally find that you don't run out cards. And then Ramp Druid also has this kind of burst with the Force of Nature Savage Roar combo. So the advantages of Ramp Druid very quickly is that it can snowball the game really fast. Once you have board control, it's hard to lose it. Having wild growth is insane. It's like having the coin every turn. Innervate is also insane. And then you have a lot of burst potential with Force of Nature Savage Roar. Disadvantages are, because it is a heavily minion based deck, it is hard to recover if you cannot get the board control. It falls behind without mana growth or innervate early on, and it's punishable for tempo and mana inefficiencies. And also there's no really strong hard removal. You only have like the Raz and swipes. So let's start off with how to build a Ramp Druid deck. So first off, you got the core cards. So these are the core cards that pretty much every Ramp Druid would have. You got the double innervate. Innervate, of course, is a strong tempo push. It allows for plays that you normally can't make, such as playing 2 6-drops on one turn on turn 10. It also helps out if you don't have wild growth. And yeah, wild growth, of course, is pretty much like a coin every turn. It puts you ahead of the game. It allows you to push out bigger minions or bigger plays earlier on. Raz is just a really good, efficient card removal or spell for either removing a small minion, dealing some damage, or cycling. Shade of Naxxramas is I would say is a pretty good 3-drop in Ramp Druid, especially because there's a possibility of bringing it out earlier with Innervate or Wild Growth, and you just get it growing, and once it grows really big, you could either trade really well with it, or you could use it for some heavy damage. Then we have Swipe. Swipe, of course, is the best AoE Druid has. It's efficient, it does decent damage, and especially now with a lot of 1 health minions, Swipe is very important in Ramp Druid. Keeper of the Groves is a very versatile card. In aggro decks, it could trade with a lot of minions by using the 2 damage, and then using its body to trade with 1 or 2 more minions, or it could silence a big minion like Sylvanas, Tyrion in the control matches. It is your only source of silence in the deck. Druid of the Claw is a great 5-drop because you have the option to either go charge with a 4/4 body, which is pretty strong for 5 mana, and or it could be a 4/6 taunt, which is also very powerful because it's hard to deal with, it's hard to get rid of. I usually find it could take 2 cards to deal with it, unless they have something like a Fireball. Overall, it's just a great 5-drop. Emperor Saracen is the newest card from Blackrock Mountain release, and I think this is a new core card for Druid because it just synergizes so well with what the deck does. By playing it either on turn 6 or earlier from Wild Growth or Innervates, it allows your entire hand, which you should normally have at least a couple cards in your hand by the time you play it, and it makes all the cards cost a lot lower. So the deck mostly has a lot of mid-game cards, and with Emperor Saracen, it just allows you to push for a lot more than you should. And then Ancient of Lore is also really good. It's your source of healing if you get low against an aggro deck, or it could draw you 2 cards, which puts you in a big advantage against either mirror matches, control matches, especially in like Warrior. This card pretty much wins you the game. So these are the core cards that you should have in your Ramp Druid deck if you plan to play it. Now, there are a lot of optional cards. Pretty much everything else in the deck is player preference, or you could adjust your deck based on what the meta is. So here I have 30 different cards that you could consider putting in your deck. Of course, there are a lot more cards that you could consider. These are just all that I could fill in here. So first off, we got Zombie Chow. Zombie Chow is a great card to play if you find that there's a lot of aggro, especially because you see a lot of Face Hunter. Zombie Chow is just amazing. You play it on turn 1, and it would trade for 2 minions pretty much against aggro decks. And then the 5 health isn't too bad, especially if you play it early on where you're not dealing damage anyways. Of course, if you're playing against a control matchup, this card can be annoying because it heals your opponent back up when you want to get them low for combo or something. So I normally find that I run 1 Zombie Chow, mainly because it's great against aggro decks, not so well in control. Savage Roar. I want to talk about Savage Roar and Force of Nature at the same time. Some people don't play the Savage Roar Force of Nature combo if they're playing a more defensive deck, but Ramp Druids normally contain at least one complete combo, or they may have different ratios, like 2 Savage Roars and 2 Force of Natures, or 2 Savage Roars, 1 Force of Nature. I personally do 2 Savage and 1 Force of Nature. I'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, the Savage Roar combo is pretty much your finisher. Once you get the board control, then you just use this for that big burst. It also threatens your opponent every time they're under 14 health. And also, if you have just Savage Roar and you have a board, it could buff you up for the win anyways. Overall, it's just a great combo. Normally you want to save it for the game finisher, but sometimes you can use the combo to regain board control. Then we got Big Game Hunter. Since Druid doesn't have any hard removal, Big Game Hunter allows you to deal with those huge minions such as Dr. Boom and Ragnaros. Dr. Boom especially, since everyone runs that. Druid of the Flame is an interesting card. You might consider playing it as a 3-drop instead of Shade if you don't like Shade. You would probably put it in the 2/5 body, and the 2/5 is also really powerful, especially against more aggro decks. Mind Control Tech, since Zoo is like so big right now, Mind Control Tech could help steal you some minions. Also, if you fall behind in board in any kind of matchup, Mind Control Tech can bring you back in it. Kazan Mystic was one of the more favored tech card, and this was when Mech Mage was pretty popular, or any kind of mage. And this also helps out in secret. Since Druid has a hard time against, say, Mirror Entity, Kazan Mystic helps you for that. And against Hunter, if they have Explosive Trap or Freezing Trap, this definitely helps a lot too. Of course, if you're not playing against class that runs secrets, then Kazan Mystic is complete garbage for you, but that's the risk you take when teching this in. Piloted Shredder is a great 4-drop. It's a sticky minion. It allows, when it dies, you get another minion, which could help for Savage Roar. It can trade up. Overall, it's just a great 4-drop that's hard to deal with. You would have the choice between a Shredder, playing Piloted Shredders, or Senjin Shieldmaster. It's totally up to you, it's preference, and it depends. You might consider it as being, if the meta is more aggro. If it's more aggro with like Zoos and Hunters, then you might want to play the Senjin. If it's more control based, then the Shredders would be better. Some people like to play Violet Teacher. Violet Teacher is an okay card in Ramp Druid. However, I don't feel like it's that great. Some people prefer it over Senjin or Shredder because you could get those 1/1 bodies. But yeah. Some people also like to play Nourish. This is when they either have a more later mana curve and they want to get the extra ramp, or if you have a more lower curve and you play your cards a lot earlier, Nourish could help replenish your hand, kind of like Ancient of Lore. However, if you do play this card, you will fall behind in that turn, unless it's like really late into the game. Azure Drake has been cycled in. It's between the Azure Drake or the Sledge Belcher. Sludge Belcher, if you would play it, because it's great against, it's really good against stuff like Warrior or aggro decks for sure. But Azure Drake helps you speed up your deck because it cycles your card. It gives you spell power for Wrath and Swipe. And if you wanna be looking for your Savage Roar Force of Nature combo, then people like to play Azure Drake. Or if you want to play more defensively, people play Sludge Belcher. Again, as preference. Harrison Jones is also a tech card like MC Tech and Kazan Mystic, where if the meta has a lot of weapon classes, say like Paladin, Warrior, Rogue, then this card would definitely help you a lot. It gains you tempo, and yeah, it's just a great card for weapon class metas. Lotheb, I play Lotheb pretty much every time. I wouldn't say it's that optional. It's just such a solid 5-drop that when you play it, especially on turn 5, when you play it, it's most likely going to stick. It has a great body, it can trade with a lot, and Battle Cry is really effective, especially if you're playing against like a rogue or a mage, and if you play it at the right time, it's also critical. Spectral Knight, when it first came out from Naxxramas, a lot of people were putting it in their Druid decks, however not many people play it now. Spectral Knight is decent if you're playing against a heavy mid-game or late-game meta, and that's because Spectral Knight forces your opponent to have to trade with him, rather because you can't efficiently remove it with spells like a Fireball or anything. And especially good against Mage for that reason. Next is Karen. Karen is similar to Piloted Sky Golem, so I'll talk about these two together. So Karen is a card where it's very annoying to deal with, especially in a heavy warrior matchup or heavy warrior meta, or pretty much any kind of control matchup. Karen is just really annoying because of its death rattle. Of course, it can get silenced, and it is only a 4/5 body, so it doesn't trade up. It's great against other mid-game decks. Sky Golem, people like Sky Golem over Karen now, mainly because Sky Golem can trade up. It does have that 6 attack. However, Sky Golem is less consistent because it summons a random 4-cost minion rather than Karen, which pretty much will always spawn you a Yeti. Some people I've seen are starting to play Hogger. Hogger gives you that 2/2 taunt every turn, and that might be good against aggro decks. I do think it's a bit slow, especially because the bodies aren't that big. But again, it's preference. If you think Hogger is good, then you can play Hogger. Some people also play Sunwalker because it's a hard to deal with taunt, mainly because of the Divine Shield they have to get through. Good against aggro decks if you could get this far into the game. Sylvanas, of course, is a great legendary. Forces your opponent to either have to play around her, have a silence for her, or trade unfavorably into her. So Sylvanas, of course, is like a game-changing card. It can be a game-changing card. Just a great card to play. The Black Knight, this depends on what you see in the meta. If you see a lot of Druids or a lot of mid-game control decks will run Sludge Belchers, Priests with their Death Lords, even Zoo because they play Defender of Argus. The Black Knight will normally have a target in pretty much every deck. Of course, there are some metas where they have more taunts, so Black Knight's better, and some metas where they only have like one type of taunt, so you wouldn't play the Black Knight because you would be holding onto him forever. But if you are able to play the Black Knight, the Battle Cry just gives you so much tempo swing, especially if you're against a Druid. It's like a game-changing turn. Ancient of War, is a huge taunt. So if you're playing against like a mid-range or an aggro meta and you're able to bring out Ancient of War, it's going to get you a lot of value. You're never going to put it into the 10-5. It's always going to be like a 5-10 taunt. Dr. Boom should be a core card. It's pretty much a core card in every mid-range control deck, just because it's such a great card. Like 7 mana, you get 7/7. Of course, it is BGH targetable, but most people only run 1 BGH, and it gives you the 2 boom bots, which are crazy because the RNG can pretty much win you the game sometimes. Dr. Boom is also very useful against Freeze Mage. if you get the freeze mage low enough and play Dr. Boom, they can't clear your board, otherwise the boom box will kill them, and their ice blocks won't be able to stop it. I've seen some people start to play Full Reaper 4000. This is in response, I would expect, to the Zoo meta, and it could also work against mid-range, mainly because it's 6'9", so it's a huge body, and it's able to cleave so many minions at once. So especially in Zoo, it pretty much wipes the board, and the Zoo player can't do anything to deal with it. So that's why some people are starting to test out Full Reaper. Some people play KT, Kills Facade. This card's amazing when you trade some minions in, get the board clear, drop the Kel'Thuzad and refill your board. Pretty much you win the game from there. Yeah, Kel'Thuzad is just great. If you're winning the game or have a slight advantage or you're neck and neck, this guy pushes you to that advantage. Of course, if you don't have a board, then just playing it is kind of weak. And that's why some people might choose to play Ragnaros. Ragnaros, of course, is a great legendary. It's pretty OP. You play it on the field, it does 8. It's pretty much like an 8 damage charge. However, it is RNG, but you can manipulate it if you can control the board. So Ragnaros is just, of course, a great card. Sneed Old Shredder. Some people like to play him because of the death rattle. Is pretty annoying, and big body. Sometimes it can get you a really good legendary. So those are your like options for 8 mana legendaries. I like Cenarius. Cenarius is a great card because it could give you 2/2 taunts, which has extra bodies for aggro, or it could give you more bodies for the Force Savage Roar combo. Or if you already have a couple minions on the board, you could give them a 2/2 buff, which is also really good. And Cenarius itself is a 5/8, which is really hard to deal with for your opponent, unless they have hard removal. Finally, we have Ysera. Ysera is good in really slow metas because it takes pretty much an entire turn, but if you're able to play Ysera on a safe turn, you're getting immediate value from the dream cards, and your opponent pretty much can't deal with a 4/12 body unless, of course, they have hard removal. So your Ysera is usually safe and pretty much wins you the game over time. So these are just some optional cards that you could play in your Druid deck. There are a lot more. As you can see, you just go through your collection, pretty much anything can fit into your Druid. It's just up to you, tweak around with it based on the meta and what you think you like and prayer preference. So if you guys want to see what my deck list is, this is my deck list. So we got double Innervate, core card, one zombie chow for the aggro, 2 wild growth for is a core card, 2 wrath core card. I like 2 savage roars because savage roar, if you already have a board, pushes you for a lot of damage. It can help you trade, and savage roar, in my opinion, is more flexible than force of nature. So I like to have 2 savage roars in my deck. Big game hunter for that removal for the Dr. Boom or Ragnaros or whatever. 2 Shade of Naxxramas, core card, really good 3-drop. It's good against aggro because you could trade like 2 for 1. Mid-range control, once it grows big, you could trade into a bigger minion, or it could get really big where you just savage roar and you just kill your opponent. 2 swipes, of course. 2 keeper of growth. I just switched in the Senjin Shieldmaster because I see a lot of Zoo, but before that I was playing Piloted Shredder. Druid of the Claw, core card, grade 5-drop, low stab, grade 5-drop. I play 1 Sludge Belcher, just for that extra taunt with the Druid of the Claw. It's a really sticky minion. It's good against control. Force of Nature for the Savage Roar. You only play 1. You could use 2 because some people like to use the Force of Nature to help clear the board. But for now, I just like to play 1. ET. If the Emperor is just too strong not to have, just great. If you play ET, then you have Force of Nature Savage Roar in your hand, you could do that combo in turn 7, which is crazy. That's 14 damage with 7 mana. Or if you have both Savage Roars in your hand, that's 22 damage with like 9 mana, so that's just insane. Sylvanas Windrunner, of course, is a great legendary, helps regain board or secure board, steal some good minions. I recently just put in the Black Knight. I used to have 2 Belchers, but I took one out for the Black Knight. This is because I've been seeing a couple of Druids. I might switch it back into Sludge Belcher, but for now I have 1 Black Knight in here. 2 Ancient Lores, core card, just so good. Good against control, helps you draw into your combo pieces or heal up against hunters. Dr. Boom, of course, Dr. Balance, I should say, he's just so powerful. And then for my final late game legendary, I do choose the Cenarius. Cenarius for buffing up my creatures I already have on the board, or giving me those extra bodies for a Savage Roar, or protecting myself. So this is my current list of the Druid deck. I keep in mind that I do tweak it here and there every so often, depending on what I see in ladder or for tournaments. Let's go over some tips I could give you for Druid. So like I said before, Druid can be really punishable if you misplay your innervates, or you don't efficiently use your mana to the full potential. So you want to really plan your turns ahead, trying to make sure you can play something or do something every turn rather than just having an awkward hero power turn. You really want to maximize your mana, since you are getting the extra mana from Wild Growth and Innervate. You want to really push that advantage. For example, one example that I always like to do is, say you have an Innervate in your hand, and it's better with Shredder, but let's say I just have a Senjin and a Shade of Next Ramps in my hand, okay? And I also have a... yeah, okay. So I have Innervate, Shade, and Shield Master. So, turn 1, some people would play the Innervate out the Shade because they want to grow their Shade quicker. However, this is a really small error. Sometimes it is correct, but I don't like to Innervate Shade turn 1 because that means turn 2, turn 3, unless I draw something like a Wild Growth or a Wrath or another Shade, I won't have anything to do on turn 2, turn 3. So what I would normally do is just pass on turn 1. If you're playing against like a mid-range deck, they normally won't do anything on turn 1 either. So on your turn 2, you would Innervate out the Senjin Shield Master. And then turn 3, you could just play the Shade. And then, let's see, on turn 4, you might have a coin, you could coin out a Lotheb or Jaded Claw or something. But the point is that you want to play something every turn and use your mana most efficiently. By doing that combination where you Innervate out the Senjin on turn 2, and then you're allowed to play Shade on turn 3, rather than just hero powering both on turn 2, turn 3, and not doing anything with your Shade. So that's just something really small, but it does really make a difference. That's just an example on how you want to maximize your mana, plan your turns out ahead of time. Another tip I could give you is that you always want to gradually grow your board, because this deck is very heavily based on minions, and you want to have that board just for the Savage Roar, Force of Nature combo. Sometimes you might be tempted to play like a Wrath and like a hero power rather than playing something like a Druid of the Claw. Just so you want that early board control. However, you might only have like a Shade or a Keeper on the board already. Sometimes you could just play the Druid of the Claw into taunt and just pass your turn. You don't have to attack sometimes. You don't have to attack on every turn. So sometimes it is better just to develop a solid minion that's going to stick, and then keep growing your board rather than focusing really hard on removal but not playing any of your minions. You do have to remember that your minions are mostly mid-game creatures, and for most of the game you're only going to be able to play one minion at a time. Only until you get into very late into the game can you play like 2 minions at a time. So you really have to make sure you keep growing your board while still maintaining board control. That leads into my next tip, where board is very important. So if you lose your board, it's really hard to fall behind, because again, you can only play like 1 at a time. So you always have to be aware of removal that your opponent may have. So once you get more experience at the game, you'll know stuff like, let's say Shaman, they'll have Lightning Storm, or Paladin will have Consecrate. So you want to keep your minions healthy over that. Try to keep your minions healthy over those board clears. Sometimes it's better to let your minion die for the trade rather than having 2 minions at low health that would die to board clear. So I'd rather have like 1 minion at full health rather than both of them at low health. Also, another tip is about Wild Growth. Wild Growth is amazing early on if you can play it, as it'll let you play your minions earlier. But say by like turn 5 or so, then Wild Growth, you might as well, you top deck Wild Growth, you might as well just hold on to it. Because once you get 10 mana, you can use the Wild Growth to cycle a card. So you don't want to play Wild Growth in the mid to late game because there's really no point. The only time you would do that in the mid to late game is when you want to curve out into something like, say your turn 5, you want to play Wild Growth so you can play Dr. Boone next turn. Or you need to do it on turn 6, or no, turn 7, so you could play the Force of Nature combo. So unless you have something planned ahead of time, don't use Wild Growth later in the game. It's only good in the early game. Okay, next I want to talk about the Mulligans. So when you're against aggro decks, say against Hunter or maybe Zoo, Face Paladin, I don't know, mostly going to be Hunter or Zoo. These are the cards that you want to try to mull for. So you want to innovate. You want to try and get Innervate, Zombie Chow, Wild Growth, Wrath, Shade, Next Raven, Swipe, and Keeper of the Growth. Innervate allows you to push out a bigger minion while your opponent is still playing low-cost minions. So say like turn 3 or something, you could bring out a Druid of the Claw, and then if they're like a Hunter, they have to put 3 minions into that. So that's why Innervate is good. Zombie Chow, if you're against a Hunter, will trade 2 for 1. If you're going to do, it might just trade 1 for 1, but it allows you to play something and trade for a minion, so they don't grow a huge board that early on. Wild Growth is just good because it lets you ramp up into, say, like a Keeper of the Growth or a Taunt. So having Wild Growth and playing it on turn 2 is also really good, and by this time your opponent shouldn't have too big of a board where you can't deal with once you start ramping up. Wrath allows you to kill a high priority minion or a high damage minion, so you might use it on a Leopard Gnome or a Knife Juggler. If you could bring out Shade of Naxxramas early on, that's really good because once it grows, you could trade so that it will trade 2 for 1 at least. So that's why. And besides that, Zombie Chow, Shade is your other early game minion. Swipe, you may consider not holding on to Swipe if you could get something better, but Swipe is sometimes good to look for, or it's like a decent card to have in your hand against aggro decks, especially against Hunter. For sure, Hunter Swipe is a card you want because it pretty much cleans off the entire board. Against Zoo, it's getting better against Zoo because they have so many imps, so Swipe is good to have. Keeper of the Grove is just great, amazing against aggro decks because if you can ramp it up, especially with Innervate or Wild Growth, you can use it 2 damage to kill something, and then it's 2-4 would normally trade 2 for 1. So yeah, that's why Keeper is just great in the aggro mulligan. So this is generally what you want for aggro decks. When you're against mid-range and control decks, this is all you really care about. Innervate and Wild Growth. More importantly, Wild Growth over Innervate. Wild Growth allows you to, of course, stay ahead of your opponent, and this will allow you to drop bigger minions before them. It's really important, especially against the Mirror Match Druid, or pretty much any control mid-range. Wild Growth is just great. Wild Growth is just good in any kind of matchup, so you want to look for Wild Growth, but when you're against a mid-range control deck, I aggressively will mulligan for Wild Growth, so I'll throw everything back sometimes just so I can find the Wild Growth. Or if I have to innovate, that's okay too, because it allows you to push out a big minion earlier on and get you that advantage. Again, once you have these cards, you do want to plan out what else you want to have in your hand. So you may try to find like a Druid of the Claw or something that you can ramp out. So just having Innervate Wild Growth is not enough. You want to have a minion that could play after these. Alright, so I'm just going to go over the matchups really quickly. Of course, matchups, you have to figure it out for yourself to really get good at it. But I'm just going to tell you some advantages, disadvantages with each one, what the favorable matchups are. I did do a playtest of a 10-game sample size to get some percentages. Of course, these percentages aren't that great because it's only 10 games, but it gives you some idea of what you can expect. So Control Warrior, I didn't play against like that Grim Patron Warrior, but most of the time you'll see Control Warrior. And this is a favorable matchup for the Druid. It's usually, I would say, like 70%. Mainly you win because the Warrior normally wins by getting board control slowly over time with their hard removals. However, Druid has so many strong mid-game creatures that Warrior has a tough time killing them all. And then Ancient of Lore just draws you those more extra cards, and the Warrior just falls behind from there. So Druid normally outpaces the Warrior, and it's a favorable matchup. I don't really find, well, Shaman with armor up. Alright. Okay, here we go. So Shaman, I got a 70% win rate. I normally like this matchup. It could go either way, but I feel like Druid has higher quality minions than the Shaman does. And Shaman's sources of removal, like Crackle, Lightning Storm, they aren't always that great against Druid, since Druid has a lot of high health minions. And also, Shaman has the overload mechanic, which kind of goes in opposite to Druid. Druid, you gain mana, while Shaman, you restrict your mana. So, especially on turns when they're overloaded, you could just play some minions and the Shaman will just fall behind from there. So that's why Druid is a favorable to decent matchup. A Rogue is, I would say, an unfavorable matchup. The biggest I got 50% on this, but the biggest reason is saps put you extremely behind in tempo. So, say you spend your entire turn playing a Sludge Belcher, the Rogue could just sap it away and then just keep doing what they're doing, applying pressure on board, applying pressure on damage. So, mainly the saps is what puts Druid as an unfavorable matchup against the Rogue. However, if you can stabilize and get a board growing, then it is a decent matchup and the Druid can win half the time. Paladin's a pretty easy, I would say favorable to decent matchup. I got 60% on this. Basically, the swipe clears off all the dudes that the Paladin makes from muster or from hero powers. Paladin is more of a mid-range control deck, however their minions aren't that great compared to Druids. So just in quality of minions, Druid is better. Ancient of Lore helps you get ahead, and yeah. Hunter, some people say this is an unfavorable matchup, however I got 60% against the Hunter. Pretty much it's all about that early game. If the Hunter could do a lot of damage to you in like the first 4 turns, then you're in trouble. However, if the Hunter can't, either has a bad hand or the slow start, or you have a good hand with like Zombie Childs, Wrath, Swipe, and you're able to stabilize the board, then once you get a huge board, you could just Savage Roar and kill the Hunter really easily. And you have Ancient of Lores, which you would normally use to heal. Mirror match. So if you're against another Ramp Druid, it really depends on who gets the wild growth first or an innervate. Whoever could have better mana pushes, better tempo swings, then they will win. I got 60% against Druid. It should be 50-50 because it can go either way. It depends on the player, it depends on all the draws. And you do really want to maintain board control, so you can using Force of Nature, Savage Roar, or any part of the combo to regain board control is really acceptable against the Druid, because once the Druid falls behind the other Druid, then they can't really come back from there. Okay, so Warlock. There are a couple of types of Warlocks out there. Let's talk about Zoo real quick. Zoo, I think I have about 60% win rate. Zoo puts out a lot of decently powerful minions early on. So if you can get the board stabilization through like keepers, swipes, wraths, or just having big taunts that the Warlock has to invest a lot to trade into, you can definitely beat the Zoo quite easily. Against Handlock, the Warlock used to be the Handlock used to be favored over Druid. However, now it's not so much. You have big game hunters, you have the combos to just kill the Warlock. So it depends if you could get a big enough board that doesn't get cleared by Shadow Flames. And if your opponent, if you play around Molten Giants and big taunts, you should be okay. You can silence Twilight Drakes with your keepers. Mage is usually an unfavorable matchup in all types of mage matchups. So either in Tempo Mage, Tempo Mage and Mech Mage, the average was 45%. In Freeze Mage, I got 40%. This is because the mage can normally out-tempo the druid. This is usually from like their secrets such as Mirror Entity, Counter Spell, and they have really efficient removal with Fireballs, Frostbolts. So the mage is a really tough matchup because they can get the tempo. However, it is winnable if you're just able to play smartly around the secrets and develop a board. But against Freeze Mage, because you do need a board to kill the Freeze Mage, and the Mage just keeps freezing your board turn after turn, it can be a very difficult matchup. It is possible to win if the Mage can't stall out long enough and you're able to push enough damage through, get the Dr. Boom and the Boom Boss to end it. And the last matchup is Priest. Priest is just like a terrible matchup. I have 40%. From the 10 game sample size, but when I play it on ladder or in tournaments, I normally find I can't beat a priest, especially because they now have like that resurrect. So since druid doesn't have any hard removal, and priest has huge minions such as Death Lords, Injured Blade Masters, it's really hard to beat the priest. The priest over time just gains the board, and once they get the board, you can't come back from it, and they just beat you from there. They also get advantages through Thought Steals, they have Light Bombs, Arcanized Soul Priest. So the Priest just has a lot of stuff that is good against Druid. Of course you do have quite a few 4 attack minions, but the Priest still gets over that, and it's just a really hard matchup. So yeah, that's my guide on Ramp Druid. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I covered in detail enough for you to learn the deck, try it out. If you're new at this, definitely try it out and learn this deck. It's really good on ladder and in tournaments. Overall, it's just a great deck. I don't think it's going to ever be a weak deck. It's always going to be consistently strong deck. It's, of course, it has its good matchups and weak matchups, but the Druid can pretty much take a game from anybody. So with the right draws. So Ramp Druid is just such a great deck, especially with the Emperor added into here. It's just a really good deck, got a lot of potential. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, guys. Thanks for watching this video. Follow me on Twitch at TheJordude. Subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter at coL.Th. And thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys get some good wins with this deck. And yeah, if you have any questions, you could comment down below and I could answer them back. I should also have a written guide. If that's already out, I'll have the link down there as well. You can view it. If you don't want to listen to this video again, you could just read through it. And yeah, thanks for watching, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Peace.